Good afternoon, students. Welcome to Learner Development and Learning. I'm your tutor, Miss Sam. So what we are going to do here today, we are going to go through a lot of information that you need to be aware of, that you need to go through for you to really make sure that you understand before your examination time. So welcome to the presentation of this subject, and feel free to contact me if you have any problem. You can call me from 1700 hours to 19. So feel free to call on my cell phone or send me an SMS if you don't understand. I'm more than willing to assist you in advance. And remember, we are going to go through this so that you understand what exactly is expected from you during the examination time. So what you need to understand first of all is the general information. So to understand what exactly am I expected to do during the examination. So this examination is out of 120 marks, and you are expected to answer all questions because you don't have a choice. You don't have, you don't have to choose certain questions instead of the other one. So you need to prepare yourself, meaning that for each unit, the examination has covered something from each unit. That's why you need to go through all the units. So you don't need to say, I only love one unit or unit 5 or unit 4, but I don't. You need to understand everything. But the most important thing is when you are in examination, you need to understand the verbs. So the verbs are the very important thing because in most cases what I have detected is that you student, when you get the question, once you see one word that you know, you start answering the question without even checking the whole sentence for you to make sure that the sentence is making sense to what you have to answer. Sometimes the word that you have seen in the previous question is just being used in that question, but in a different way. That's why you need to read the question carefully to understand it before you start answering. It's not just like free, then you see the word, then you start answering. You need to read the question wholly. Everything in the question is very important, but the most important thing to guide you is the verb. What is the verb asking you to do? Does it ask you to discuss? Does it ask you to describe? Did it ask you to explain or mention? Those are the most important things that you need to know. But in most cases, what you do, you just put, and if it's saying describe or explain, you just put points like it's saying mention. So it's very important for you to be extra careful when you are answering all that. So these are the most common verbs that used in the questions. For example, they are put in levels because levels of high difficult kind of level of the basics and so on. So we have, for example, level 1, they will just say define, meaning you are giving brief meaning. It's not a long explanation, but just brief meaning. Then we have to describe, provide more details for features on issues because you are describing it. So if you say define, you are only giving that specific definition, the meaning to it. But when you are describing it, you are attaching more to it. Then we have outline, give an overview, and indicate main features in a conscious manner. Then we have explain, you describe and you indicate relationship between things, you clarify. When you are clarifying, you are making certain things clear. So then when you are listing or you are naming, you are just giving names, fact, and object. So what you need to understand the level of the question. Is it at level 1, level 2, or level 3? Because this level guides you on how much you should give. Because sometimes it's just saying mention, then you start discussing, then you are not answering the question anymore. So for discussion, you give clear description pointing out positive, negative features. Then you have compare, where you are indicating similarity and differences of particular criteria. Then you determine, use given information to work out the answer. Why, when you are differentiating, you have two things that you need to give criteria, because there are two things that you need to differentiate. Then we have the level 3, which is more difficult, where you compare, you give contrast between things differently and similarities. So those are things that you need to give. Argue about something, critical discuss. Critical discuss is different from discuss itself, because discuss, you just discuss. But when they say critically discuss, then it's a higher level of understanding and evaluation and critical thinking that you are putting in. So those are very important things. And what you need also to do is to write things which are very neat and somebody can read. So when you are writing this, make sure that you are not writing it for yourself. Someone is going to read that and going to read it for you and going to mark you. So that is very important. And the format of examination, as I have said, is 120 marks, duration of 3 hours. And the most important thing also to take note is to look at the marks allocated to the question. Sometimes you spend so much time on the question which is only having 2 marks. And instead of focusing on other questions which you might pick up a lot of marks as well. So make sure that you mind checking the questions as well, so that you know what to answer. You can't spend 10 minutes on a question which is only giving you 2 marks. For chapter 1, I want you to look at domains of development. What are they? When people are talking about domains of development, developmental domains, what are they talking about? And I also want you to look at what are the main features of adolescence development domains. So I want you to understand what are the factors that affect learner development and what makes development easy or difficult. So because when somebody is developing, there are some factors that can implicate or can be of obstacle, can stop development. What are they? Or there are also some factors in a positive way that can make development more easier. So I want you to understand, first of all, you have to define what are those developmental domains. We have physical, social, emotional, cognitive. You need to understand what are they and their features and so on. So I also want you to discuss the symptoms of sexual, emotional, and physical abuse. So when a child coming to your class who is abused physically, who is abused emotionally, who is abused physically, how will you tell? What are the symptoms? Because not all the symptoms that you see will be of abuse. Some can be caused by another different things. However, as a teacher, you need to at least have basic knowledge of certain symptoms that you can pick up, or certain signs that you can say, wow, this is the red flag. This child was not like this. So how do you tell when a child is being abused? So what is that you look for? So I also want you to understand what are the causes of behavioral problems in schools and how, as a teacher, you are going to handle it. Very important, first of all, you need to understand what is behavioral problems. Before you talk about the causes, you need to understand what exactly is behavioral problems. Then what are the causes and how do we handle it? Then we go to chapter 2, which is mostly talking about discipline. You have to define what discipline is all about, how to create positive self-concept among learners in your class. Because these learners are coming with low self-esteem. Sometimes they are coming from background which is very violent and so on. So how do you create a positive outlook toward life in these learners? How do you tell them that you are worthy, you can still be, you can still achieve, your dreams are still valid. Despite what you are going through, you can achieve something. So I want you to look firstly at the definition of what discipline is all about and how to create positive self-concept among learners and how to help them to create positive outlook toward life. So how do you discipline learners without hurting them as well? So without hurting their concept, because discipline is one of the components which is very important in education, which is very important in your classroom. Classroom can only be well managed if you maintain high level of discipline in your class. But still, you don't need to head through discipline. As a teacher, you need to understand, how do I assist the learners without hurting them? How do I discipline them without them looking at me like I'm a monster? So how do you discipline learners in your class? Very important. You need to understand, how do you do that? So I also want you to look at the different types of disciplinary ways. What are the different? How do you discipline learners? What are the different? What are different ways of disciplining children? How do you discipline, and which one work for you? So out of the types of disciplinary ways, I want you also to look at, which one do you think works well for you? So in your classroom settings, and when you are asked which one, that means that you have to give reasons for what you are talking about. If you choose one of them, then you have to give reasons why you have chosen that one, because it's very important, it's very crucial for you, not just to pick one, but have reasons for picking one. So I also want you to look at growth and development, that it depends on many factors. When we are growing, when we are developing every day, there are so many factors that are part of the process. For example, we have family, we have the age, we have the general health, we have the gender, we have the eating habits, and activity levels. All those really play important role on the way you grow, on the way you develop. So then we have also stages of development, because as you can see, somebody has to be born, then somebody has to go to preschool years, middle school years, then we have adolescents, then these are the children mostly you are dealing now with it. Secondary schools, junior to secondary schools. So there are many levels. In chapter 3, I want you to look at, what are the theories of development. I want you to differentiate those theories of development and differentiate what is the difference between the needs and the wants. So when you're talking about, this is what the child needs and this is the child wants, what are the difference between the two? Because the two are completely different. How this theory influence learners' behavior at school. So we are talking about this theory of Abraham Maslow hierarchy, Maslow hierarchy of needs. So what is this theory all about? We know that it's having basics, physiological needs. Then we go to safety, when we go to love and belonging, when we have self-esteem, when we have self-actualization. So how does it influence the learner's behavior? And how, when one of the needs is lacking, how does it affect the child as well? Because we need to understand it, because some kids in our classes are behaving in a certain way because their needs are affected. So you need to understand how this theory influences learners' behavior in our classrooms. Then I also want you to look at how to support gifted learners at our schools, because at our schools, in most cases, what we do, we leave the gifted learners out. It's like they know everything. We are not supporting them. We are just looking for that person who failed. So, but that's not the point. The point is, how do we support those ones that knows better, the one that excel, the one that are doing everything on their own? Because sometimes they will lose interest in school because they will find the school to be boring, because they know everything. So as a school, how do you support gifted learners in your school? So then we have chapter 4, where we are keeping learners focused. It deals with the focus. It's about attention, how to support learners' attention skills. Because sometimes learners are just in the class. It's not about attendance only. It's about being there and listening to you. Because sometimes when they are in a class, they are not listening to you, they are not paying attention, there's nothing happening, but the body is in the class. So as a teacher, how do you ensure that learners' attention skills is on pair? I also want you to look at the difference between short and long-term memories, because we have short-term memory, we have long-term memory. If I ask you today something that happens some years back, maybe when you were young, then it means that it was stored in your long-term memory. But I can tell you something today and tomorrow you forgot. So that means that it was stored in a very short-term memory. So you need to differentiate between the two. What is it, and how do those memory function? How do they affect learning as well? So because everything we are talking about here is about how does it affect learning. What makes learning so difficult? You need also to understand what are those barriers that make learning difficult. What is that is making learning difficult? Why are so many learners failing? Why are so many learners dropping out of school? What are those barriers? Why? So those are the things that you need to discuss when you are asked about the barrier to learning. I also want you to relate this barrier to learning to your own community, because you are coming from a community, you are coming from a society that is dealing with problems. So in most cases, we only read what is already written in the study guide. But there are so many other things that are not written that the author of the study guide was not aware of. So you must also try to link things from where you are coming from, because the author was not all over the country. So when we wrote sometimes study guides, we only put what we know and what we read and what we understand. But you are good at being there and explaining what is that is happening in your community. You should be able to put what is happening in your community as well. So some information to know is like the factors which influence physical growth and health of young children, and the importance of health in development of the child. So we also need to look at the factors like genetics, nutrition, illness, injury, environment, and behavior. Some of those factors have influence on our physical growth or on our mental growth as well. So, and I also want you to look at the impact of parents' attitudes on the cognitive and social development of children. So, because we have some of the parents who are supportive, some parents are not there at all for their children, and so on. So, how does parents affect the children's development as well? So, I also want you to look at one of the problems that is happening is stress. So people are in stress, and when it's become toxic, it can lead to suicide. So what is that? What leads to people to be in a very toxic stress sometimes? Sometimes it can be the death in a family. Sometimes it can be her conflict. Conflict can be between husband and wife, between her conflict at workplace, conflict at church, conflict. So, and when conflict it doesn't stop, when conflict continue, it in most cases it leads to stress. Then we have domestic violence can lead to stress. Divorce, especially for children, can also be stressed because the mother is not staying with the father anymore, and they keep on asking so many questions. And stress can also be because of prolonged illness or neglect, or emotional and physical abuse can lead to stress, and excessively harsh parenting. Sometimes we think our parenting style is the best, but if it's too harsh, then it can give problems as well. I also want you to look at self-image as a factor affecting early childhood development. So what are these factors that affect early child development, which has to do with the self-image? We are talking about lack of self-confidence. When children don't have confidence in themselves, it leads to poor self-esteem, absence of assertiveness, pretending that what they are not, non-conformity, lack of generosity, and rebellious behavior. So in this case, I want you to read through A good self-esteem helps children to develop positive ability on the following. When somebody is having positive self-esteem, they can excel, they can do well at school, they can perform well at school, and so on. So when you read through that, you should be able to understand why is it important for people to have good self-esteem about themselves. I also want, for the last chapter 5, I also want you to look at thinking skills. What are the proper study and learning habits? Because this student, you are training them to write examination, you are training them to learn for life. So what are the proper study skills that you can teach them? What are the learning habits? What will make learning better? So general study methods, how do you help children to learn better? So I also want you to look at the general information that teachers need to put into consideration. When you're at school, these are some of the things that you need to put into consideration, like suicide. Very common, young children are also committing suicide nowadays. So you need to talk about those issues. What causes suicide in most cases? What are the causes? And how do we help children when you pick up the signs? Because you need to understand what are the signs of somebody who tries to commit suicide, who want to commit suicide. How to help them and school dropouts. What are the causes? Because they reported even last night on the news that there's a high number of school dropouts in Namibia lately. What are the causes and what are the impacts? What will happen to those children in future? Then we have discipline causes of behavioral problems and what should be done to avoid behavioral problems in schools. Do you believe in corporal punishment? If yes, give reasons. If no, give reasons. But before you discuss about it, before you give reasons, you must first understand what corporal punishment is all about. So I also want you to look at the benefits of inclusive education. What is inclusive education is all about? What will be the benefits of having inclusive education in the system? I also want you to look at the contribution of HIV and AIDS. What children who have parents affected, children who are affected themselves, and teachers who are affected themselves. How does it impact the learning process? How does it impact teaching process at school level? The barriers to implementation of inclusive education is very important. We have attitude barrier, we have physical barrier. Attitude is people who say, no, we don't want to take this child in because the child is in a wheelchair. That's an attitude barrier. Then we have physical barriers. Some schools are far from homes, or they only have stairs going to a certain class. So it's the physical barrier comes in different ways. Inappropriate curriculum. Sometimes people who are teaching, what they are teaching is not what is relevant to their current situation and so on. And teachers might not be trained to deal with learners with special needs in their classes. Inadequate funding, so much less funding going to education to improve services. We still have learners in the tents and so on. Poor organization of the education system. So there's no consistency. Today people say this, tomorrow they say that. So all that can affect the implementation of inclusive education. Policies as a barriers. And lack of adequate opportunity and time for good collaboration. Lack of adequate support from parents. Now, there's sometimes parents just don't want to be involved in anything. Then we have special needs problem experience in early childhood. You need to, what are they? Identify them. Who are the gifted learners? Identify their characteristics. Identify profession also who can support children dealing with special needs in your school. So I want you to have a look at all that, and also for you to understand what are those characteristics of gifted children and what are other professionals that can support and help our children. Good luck with your examination. You are welcome to contact me anytime via my email or via my cell phone. And I wish you the best. What you need to do is just to be patient, and it's just to, you don't need to panic. You firstly need to just to read and study. When you understand everything, then there's no room for you to panic during the examination. All the best, good luck, and may you have a wonderful holiday ahead of you. I thank you.